Hi again. This is How are you? And welcome to Talk New York. The last time I have my two sisters here, we didn't finish our conversation, so we decided to continue the show. And we spoke about the United Nations World Conference Against Racism, and we got a little bit into reparation. And I think if you've been watching the show, you've heard me say several times that I think Africans should be accountable for their part in this, and I think that's where we were sort of like talking a little bit more about it. So we're going to pick it up from there. I had said that black people should be, African people should be accountable. We should allocate, I think, yes, slavery should be compensated for, because every group that has been wrong in some way in history has gotten something back. But somebody told me that it's actually in the Constitution that black people are not supposed to be compensated for anything. I don't know how far it's true.
The United States Constitution?
Yes, I haven't read it. I don't know how far it's true. But I wouldn't be surprised, because I mean, a lot of people really don't think, there are people who think that welfare is reparation enough, as absurd as that idea is. But let's continue our conversation about responsibility and why we're going after the Europeans.
Well, one thing we have to be very clear is in terms of just our whole world view and our analysis of the political economy that dominates society and what's that based on. If we look at the political economy around capitalism and imperialism is what we're talking about, we understand that the basis of it is exploitation of large numbers of people in whatever form of fashion. The labor of Africans, millions of Africans, for hundreds of years was exploited and expropriated from Africa and African continent and from African people in the United States, in the Caribbean, in Africa. So when we talk about reparations, we're talking about the exploitation of the labor that built Western Europe, that built the United States, and the Caribbean nations, that free labor that was exploited. We're entitled to compensation. First, we want it stated unequivocally that it was a crime against humanity, that African people, regardless of the dynamics that went into it, that were bar none, all of Africa and African people were exploited. There always is a buffer, a class of people that is created by the imperialists to help facilitate this exploitation. And from my analysis of what you're saying is that class of people needs to be held accountable. No question. We understand the class structure within African society and how different classes are manipulated, and neo-colonialism, and what that really means is to put in place a buffer zone of black leadership that's in line with imperialism and of these multinational corporations that will hand over large tracts of land in Africa for crumbs for themselves, while the masses of Africans are living in abject poverty. So that is created, and the African liberation struggles that were waged against imperialism were now subverted with these neo-colonialist puppets. Now what Africa and Africans are pushing for in the 21st century is economic liberation, economic empowerment, the control of their resources, their land. And they're talking about in terms of reparations, the cancellation of the debt. We're talking about multinational corporations leaving Africa and letting the people of Africa develop what's there, because the consequence of multinational corporations there are what they're fighting for is profits for themselves, not for the development of the nation. So their interest is not in the development of Africans. Their interest is in taking out whatever
Well,
resources.
now that most of these countries are independent in Africa, most of them are actually inviting foreign companies to invest because they claim they need foreign exchange. They need the resources of the West to be able to sustain themselves.
Which is why it is that this conference is so important. Because if you're in a situation where your economy is on stranglehold, you know, it's being suffocated by these debts you already have. I mean, where are the resources to develop the country? Where are the resources to build upon?
How did the debt come about, though? I think that is what is getting a lot of people. But are we going to repeat it? Okay, because
we didn't create it.
You didn't create it?
No, Ian Smith created it, Mobutu created it. I mean, I think that's what Imani is referring to in terms of you can't look at history as it started here and it stopped. It's a continuum. You have to look at where did things develop and who developed them. You know, because you see black people in power at this point in Zimbabwe does not mean that those are the people that created the foreign debt in Zimbabwe. Right. Ian Smith created that debt. You know, I mean, at the point in time where African people did not control.
Do we have any breaks? And I'm using breaks in whatever term that it will sound to you. But how do we put breaks on creating these type of people, the Mobutus of the world? How do we eliminate that? Because the Mobutus of the world tend to be the one that rule in Africa.
Well, Mobutu came to power through the orchestration of the powers of the West.
Right.
Remember that before him that there was a revolution, that there was Patrice Lumumba, and that through the mercenary actions of the United States CIA, there was a counter-revolution, and Mobutu was installed to power because he was in line with the policies of the West and the United States in particular that went against the interests of the Zimbabwean people, and that he remained there with their aid for many years and with their military support. They sent millions and millions of dollars into that country.
You see, but that's where I have a problem, because then what we're saying that anytime the West asserts themselves and anytime they throw a dice and they pick Timbuktu as, you know, an important nation, and we're going to pump our money in there, they're going to find a Mobutu in Timbuktu who is going to, you know, go along with it, and therefore the rest of the people are going to suffer. How do we stop that? How do we make sure when they throw the dice, it hits you or, you know?
It's the same situation all over. It's one based on the education level of the people, of the political education of the people. A new kind of leadership needs to step forward that shows a different perspective, a different dynamic that can expose the sellouts and the people who align themselves with people who have declared themselves in opposition to the development of the people, and show them how, one step at a time. It's a tedious process, but there needs to be the development of some new leadership, the education of the people politically, and education in terms of economically. What is this system that we're living under? What is this globalization that's going on? How does that affect me? And how we need people to define, just in terms of the World Conference on Racism, the globalization of racism. You know, how does this racism, in terms of our own development, how does that affect us? Because if the same people who are in charge of this particular area are now intensifying their sphere of influence, the same kind of dynamics is going to go on on a larger scale. So we have to look at the human rights abuses that are going to be globalized, the racism that's globalized, and how does going into the 21st century, how do we start an international movement in opposition to that? And I think we see some of that going on in Seattle and what's going on in Washington right now in terms of people really raising their consciousness in terms of what is the dynamic that's going on.
I heard something you just said, and this really doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, but this is funny. I just heard it on National Public Radio today that the police have raided an office of one one of these organizations that are protesting, that they are doing it for their own public safety, because apparently the building is a warehouse and there are some safety violations. And I just thought it was interesting, because if it had happened in Russia or Africa, they would have said, dictatorship and cracking down. I mean, I'm sure these people have been organizing in that place for a while, but all of a sudden they don't want to repeat what happened in Seattle, so the police just went in and decided to shut it down. It's a very, very interesting comment. But you're right, you mentioned something about education, and I think everything that I'm pushing, I meet a lot of African Americans and Caucasian Americans, because one thing I don't want to do is that whenever we say white, we sort of like lump everybody into it. And we as African Americans are fighting that stereotype that goes around in other communities, whereby if you're a black person, you walk in a store, you're probably going to steal something. Not all white people are racist, and there are, I shouldn't say were, there are some white people who are involved in the struggle of African people, and I want to acknowledge that. So yes, there are some white people who are racist, and they seem to have a lot of power. But yes, there are some white people who are not also. But anyway, the point I was trying to make, and I'm just talking to, I'm going to forget what I intended to say before I went into that, is that the education part that you mentioned is so critical, because until you educate the people, all the work that you people are doing, you're working so hard. You have this conference in South Africa in the year 2001, and it's not going to be put to good use, okay? Because they at the end of the day, another Mobutu will be there, and at the end of the day, Africa I will find the head of state of my country of origin, which is Ghana, sitting on 60 Minutes begging the Western world for aid. And there is nothing, since I've been to this country, there's nothing in terms of natural resources that America has that Africa does not have. We have lands, we have water, we have everything else. So the educational process is very, very important. How are you dealing with this, your organization?
Well,
do you see it as a real...
Yeah, no, definitely what's happening in the public schools, like you see in Brooklyn, Harlem, wherever black people are, there's like a real lobotomy being performed on our young people. And it's really the basis for how they track them into the criminal justice system, how they track them into that the only option they have is selling drugs on the streets, and they promote this kind of a lifestyle that's really genocidal. We have put forth through the Man in the Million Youth March, before that and beyond, for the creation of our independent institutions which we own and control. One of those institutions necessarily has got to be schools. We have had, following the Million Youth March and ongoing, discussions about how to get into the charter school legislation, but how is it that we're going to, in the mechanics of it, enact this independent school movement that we really think that black people have got to get into and take charge of. But again, these things are all intertwined. This is critical to the question of reparations, because when we talk about building our own institutions, be they educational, financial, which has to happen as well, and otherwise cultural, we're going to have to deal with the question of how is it that we finance those things. How is it, because that in the totality is the question of development. How do we, as a people who have been robbed of every single thing that it takes for development, how do we facilitate that? And in the current situation in which we exist, the powers that be are not interested in our development. We are terribly expendable to them.
Right.
And so we have to begin to look at how is it that we use every single means at our disposal to push this question.
How is the money, let's say for some miraculous reasons, the United States decided to, compensate African American people for slavery. How is the money going to be allocated? Who is going to get it? Because I know for sure a lot of people don't trust the so-called the black leaders that has been recognized in the media. There are a lot of people who think that Jesse Jackson is out there for himself. There are a lot of people who don't trust Al Sharpton. There are a lot of people, anybody that you can point out, somebody has something to say. Okay. How is this going to work?
Well, certainly we would have to come up with different ways and how to develop institutions and how to develop different mechanisms to put finances into that, into use. But the first step is to deal with the question of this is a crime against humanity, and for the United States to be put on before the World Court, the Hague. Let's put them on trial like they put different nations with crimes against humanity. We want to try the United States, not only dealing with the issues around Africans in the U.S., but Africans in Africa and Africans in the diaspora and different nations like Cuba, different, that have been subjected to the imperialism. We want the United States on trial for human rights abuses and crimes against humanity, and particularly on the issue of racism.
You think that will ever happen in your lifetime?
We think that people have the ability to exercise their political will, and we think that, yeah, we can affect that in our lifetime. But it's a massive struggle that really is going to involve everybody's input and everybody's, involvement. I think that part of the education process that we receive makes us think that, there are these eternal superpowers and that these things last forever. But everything that was made and constructed by men can be remade and fashioned by men and women, that is. And so that we believe that we have the ability to shape our futures. That is, if we make the decision that we're going to do that we're serious and consistent in doing that, and that we involve the masses of our people, because it takes all of our creative energies. We don't have billions of dollars. All we have is our labor.
Right.
So it takes all of that.
In the meantime, you guys are doing a wonderful job on your own, trying to bring awareness, educate people on some of the issues out there. Tell me a little bit about your organization and how it's funded. I mean, you guys seem to have done a lot.
Well, we are a grassroots organization. We raise funds by selling dinners and doing fundraisers, and a lot of the travel comes out of our own pockets. We have regular jobs like everyday people, but we have seen the necessity for this kind of work and will sacrifice different things, and a lot of support from a lot of different people. The organization that we are known internationally is called the December 12 Movement International Secretariat. We've been going to the United Nations Human Rights Commission for the last 10 years, dealing with issues around human rights abuses perpetrated against Africans in the United States. And we've found support in many different arenas with different nations and different organizations, and that have taken up our work, and that has broadened it. Particularly what we were talking about, Amadou Diallo and Doris Mann. The last time we were there, we sent a delegation there, was during the murder of Patrick Dorisman, and we went there prepared to talk about Amadou Diallo, but while we were there, Dorisman was murdered.
Okay.
And just the response from different nations, African nations who we've developed relationships with throughout the years. And
how big is your organization?
We don't have. It's not a big organization. We just do a lot of work. Okay. But we try to broaden it and bring as many people in as possible. Like, for instance, with this World Conference on Racism, we're trying to get at least 300 people to go to South Africa with us, and we want people to feel as if they have a responsibility to go.
Do you have any traveling packages that will make it easier for people to join you?
Well, the more people that come, is obviously the better it is. And the better it is that we can make the arrangements. But,
and if you need any more information, you call them direct, and they will be able to assist you in getting more information. That is interesting, but before we run out of time, let's move on to this poor guy here. Elian Gonzalez. Very, very sad story. I mean, it's sad to me because this is a 6-year-old child. no matter how you look at it. And it's becoming a political, he's become a political tool for whatever. You have mentioned that you went to Cuba at some point. Is it such a terrible place for people to live?
Well,
Yes, really.
the reality around Cuba is that the Cuban people are suffering from the embargo. That this external oppression that's coming from the embargo has affected the day-to-day lives of Cuban people. There's no question about that. But in terms of the health and the education and the well-being of the people mentally and physically, the Cuban people have done a tremendous amount with very little.
Right.
When we look at things that are thrown away in this country and things that Cuba has that lasts so much longer and so much more valued by the people because it's not, they don't have that much. The instilling of some real human values in terms of what brings people together under dire situations. The main thing is to stop the embargo so that people can get the medicines and get the trade, the different things that they have, and begin to develop their own economy. And that's a direct relationship to the United States embargo.
But can I just say, just in terms of what exists in Cuba,
Right.
every Cuban child enjoys, from the time they're born to the time they die, free health care, free education from kindergarten to university.
Right, which is more than we
You know, there's no such thing as homelessness in Cuba, that everybody has access to quality housing, and that there's nobody that starves, and there's not one person who's starving, another person who's eating at, 6-course meals. That's not the situation in Cuba.
But we don't know what Castro did. But anyway, that's
Well, we know
another
that he
thing.
does those things,
Okay.
right? And we know that there's nobody being shot 41 times. And we know that
Okay.
there's not unarmed young African people, and there's the population of Cuba is an African people.
Right.
And that,
Would you say that politically, though, it's a terrible place to be? Politically.
Well, I don't know if that's relative. If I'm in the United States and I'm poor and I can't afford to go to school, therefore I can't get a job,
But you
therefore
can
I can't get a
express
house.
yourself.
Yeah, but what
At
good
the
is
end
if
of the
you're
day.
expressing yourself on the bread line, I mean, and I'm not sure that's not the case in Cuba. People were, to me, talking freely. It wasn't people, I didn't get the impression that people were scared to talk. But they were talking about things that concerned them. They were talking about how do we stop this embargo? How do we develop our economy? What can we do to push ourselves forward? Because what's holding them back is not an internal thing; it's an external thing. Right. And so when you have these kind of like a straitjacket on you in terms of the embargo, you cannot move forward because you're in a state of war. It's not a armed combat thing, but it's a weaponry. They're using medicine as a weapon. They're using the lack of trade as a weapon, the lack of food. They're trying to.
And there are a lot of people who are sick and can't go to the hospital because they can't afford it.
It's a genocidal kind of situation, and it's set up externally, and then what they say to you is, if they change their political economy and change their politics, then we'll stop the embargo, as if all they have to do is do what we say they want to have to do, instead of just, look, this is a sovereign nation, they've decided to do this, let them do that.
Right. What do you think about the Elian Gonzalez case itself, the young boy? Because it baffles me that somebody can just take somebody else's child and say, you know what, I think I can raise that child better.
Yeah. I think people of conscience, I think it's really transparent what they're doing with this child. He's become something. He's become a trophy for the United States government, and particularly for the Cuban exiles in Miami, who, you know, they're painting this picture of themselves like this wonderful family, but we know that there's some organizations out there.
The woman or the girl who's supposed to be in charge of this boy is about 21 years old.
Right, she's a
Yeah.
child.
I mean, deduct 6 from that, and tell
Right.
me how old this child is for her
Yeah,
to be.
but you know, I don't want to get into so much the issues of this young woman or this individual,
Mm-hmm.
but we understand the community that exists there, understand that there are some mercenary forces in there that have carried on attacks against the Cuban people, and that this is not a battle of this little, they're using this little boy to say things are so horrible in Cuba. You know, and without the reality of that, this is a nation where this boy will have all of those things that we
You know
talked
what
about.
I was thinking? I said, if the father said, okay, fine, keep him. Would everything, I mean, 20 years from now, I want to know what happens to that child, because he's a minority, okay?
Right,
There's
right.
no college fund, I haven't heard anyway.
Right.
And they're talking about giving the father $2 million or something to stay here, and a car and a house or something to stay here. But I haven't heard anything about college fund for him. He's a minority. Who knows? He may end up meeting a bullet too, God
Right.
forbid, knock
Right.
on wood. But there's
Right.
nothing being offered to him in terms of development, except to
Exactly.
say that we're keeping him for political reasons.
Right, and you hit it on the head, because what is it the United States offers him that's this great democracy? Because I mean, if that were the case, we wouldn't be sitting here with you. You know, if the United States was a place of the land of opportunity, we wouldn't have such a things as we are experiencing, African people and people of color experience in this country. You know, but the United States has to protect this image in the world that it is the bastion of democracy and you know, the better life in the world.
And he's not going to be 6 forever. He's cute, but he's not going to be 6 forever. And when he get to teenage years and all these things are happening, I want to know where the government will be. But anyway, so that's our opinion. But let's, in closing, talk a little bit about your organization. What do you want to leave with everybody, because we have a minute to go?
Oh, definitely the World Conference on Racism. I'm sorry, one thing we did not get into that,
Okay.
I'm sure Amadi's going to want to interject as well, but we've been talking about who it is that, that affects the policies of the New York Police Department, that it is an institution, that it has a function in our community in terms of protecting the interests of the businesses and of the rich people who are not of our community, the interests of those people. And so we have enacted a campaign of economic sanctions. We said, rather than dealing with the puppets or the people we see on the front lines, let's deal with the people who direct their actions. So we have said that that we are calling for economic sanctions, that is directly to taking money out of the banks, out of Chase Manhattan, out of Citibank and all of these corporations, put them into a black controlled bank, Carver Federal Savings Bank, or if this, you know, if people are saying this nationally, to a black bank where you are. And so in that way, we can begin to exercise our
I
political
will
will.
put your number on the screen, and I will invite you back, because we have so much to talk about. I thank you very much, Shawnette. Thank you, Amadi. And thank you very much for watching. We ran out of time. This is Yajima Okwampanhofe. Thanks for watching.